The hallway smelled like lemon polish and something faintly floral, but the silence told me she was really gone. Marjorie had passed 3 years earlier, but her presence still lived in the corners of our Naples home. Her perfume clung to the velvet curtain she insisted on keeping over the west-facing window, and every time I stepped on that creaky tile near the pantry, I heard her laugh again, teasing me for never fixing it. But grief doesn't ask for permission, and neither does time. It sneaks in, gentle at first, then carves holes into your habits until the house starts to echo back your loneliness. I was 75 that summer. Long retired from the sea, I now filled my days with small errands and long walks, mostly to nowhere. Carl, my son, had moved back temporarily with his wife after the hurricane damaged their condo. "Just a few weeks, Dad," he'd said, "until the contractors finish." But weeks turned to months, and Hannah. Well, Hannah had a way of taking up space even when she wasn't speaking. She called it an aesthetic living, whatever that meant. Lots of beige throws and scented candles that smelled like laundry detergent. She rearranged the living room furniture 3 times in the first month, said it was better for flow. I didn't argue. Marjorie always said to choose peace over principle, especially when dealing with women like Hannah. One morning in July, I went to look for the wedding china. It wasn't a special occasion, I just wanted to hold it, bone white with a thin gold rim. The set had belonged to Marjorie's grandmother before she passed it down on our wedding day. We'd used it every anniversary without fail, even if it was just to eat spaghetti or scrambled eggs. That china set, 12 plates, 12 cups, delicate as mist, was the one thing I'd promised to protect. I opened the cabinet in the dining room where it had always been, empty. Not just the china, everything. The shelf liners were peeled up at the corners, and a film of dust had already started to gather on the glass. I stood there for a moment, thinking maybe I'd move them without remembering. But the set wasn't in the kitchen or in the basement boxes or anywhere else I looked that morning. When I finally sat down on the edge of the guest bed, something inside me shifted. Not a panic, but a heavy awareness. Like the slow realization your keys are gone and your door's been unlocked. That evening, Carl came home late again. He worked long hours in real estate, barely noticed what happened in the house. I asked him plainly, "Do you know where your mother's china is?" He blinked at me like I'd asked where the moon went. No clue. Maybe it's packed somewhere. Hannah was out when I asked. I waited until the next day over coffee. She smiled too quickly, brushing hair from her face like it might buy her time. "Oh, those old plates?" she said. "They had a chip, Frank, a few of them. I thought you said they were just for display." I hadn't said that. I never would. "I gave them to charity," she added, flipping through her phone. "Figured someone could use them more than we could." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she had the right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea, staring at the empty cabinet, and I realized something else. I didn't believe her. Not about the chip, not about the charity, not even a little. My gut, the same gut that had kept me alive through typhoons and fires at sea, was twisting in warning. The next morning, I got a call that proved I wasn't losing my mind. It came just after 9 while I was pouring cereal I didn't want. The voice on the other end was familiar, warm, and that way you forget people can be. Sylvia Trent. We hadn't spoken in a year or two, not since Marjorie's funeral. She used to work with my wife at the library back when everything was slower, kinder. Sylvia collected antique dishware and always had a sharp eye for detail. She didn't call just to catch up. "Frank," she said after the briefest greeting, "did you happen to sell your nori take set?" I gripped the edge of the counter. "Excuse me?" "The wedding china from your anniversary dinner, the one you brought to the volunteer gala in 2009. She paused. "Someone listed it on Marketplace. I was browsing last night and nearly fell out of my chair. I felt the blood drain from my face. Can you send me the photos?" "Already did," she said gently. I thought it might be a mistake. I checked my phone. There they were, 12 cups and saucers, 12 plates, just as I remembered. The same faint hairline on the second soup bowl that Marjorie had cried over the day she dropped it, and the napkin ring, hers. painted with a tiny forget-me-not. The listing had no name, just a local pickup address across town near the art district. Price, $280, a bargain. Lightly used vintage charm, it said. I thanked Sylvia and promised to call her later. My hands shook as I sat back down. There wasn't even anger in me yet, just a strange quiet, like the ocean right before a storm. I stared out the kitchen window at the bougainvillea climbing the fence and thought about what it meant to take something that didn't belong to you. Not just the plates, but the memory of them. The mornings and anniversaries, the quiet joy of setting the table together, gone in a click. Hannah came downstairs 2 hours later in a cloud of perfume and beige linen. Morning, she said, breezing past me to the fridge. Did you give the plates to charity? I asked, keeping my voice low. Or did you sell them? She froze, hand halfway to the almond milk. I know where they are, I added. I saw the photos. There was a beat of silence. Then she turned around, slowly, her expression unreadable. Frank, she said almost sweetly. They were just collecting dust. I thought it wouldn't matter. It matters, I said, still seated. They belong to Marjorie. Her face tightened. And she's gone, isn't she? You don't even use them anymore. You don't get to decide what parts of her I keep. Her jaw flexed, and then she laughed, small and bitter. You're blowing this out of proportion. But I wasn't. I stood, not quickly, but deliberately. Take the listing down, I said. I'm getting them back. She said nothing, just turned on her heel and disappeared upstairs, slippers slapping against the hardwood like punctuation marks. I didn't wait. I messaged the seller, pretending, of course, to be someone else, and arranged to meet that afternoon. Sylvia offered to come with me, and I accepted. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed a witness, someone who remembered Marjorie's hands and the way she cradled each plate like it was sacred. The woman who met us in the parking lot looked familiar from behind, blonde hair pulled into a clip, big sunglasses, floral blouse. Hannah didn't even flinch when she saw me, just said, "Really?" Like I'd crashed a party. I looked down at the box at her feet. Every piece was there, every stolen thing. I handed her the money. "This should cover the cost of the lie," I said softly. She said nothing. I turned to Sylvia, who carried the box with reverence. That night I unpacked the china, one piece at a time, and set the table like Marjorie would have. The dining room was quiet, lit only by the soft overhead pendant and the glow from the bay window. I didn't cook anything special, just warmed up a can of soup and sliced a piece of bread. But I used one of the dinner plates anyway. It felt right. Sacred, even. I placed her cup beside mine, filled it with tea, and sat in my old chair across from the empty one, the seat where Marjorie used to hum while buttering rolls. I didn't eat much. I just sat there and let the memories come. They came in waves. The Thanksgiving when the kids were small, and she polished each plate until they glowed. The anniversary she insisted on using the good china for peanut butter sandwiches because we couldn't afford steak that year. The afternoon sun catching the gold trim just so, like it belonged in a museum. I thought I'd feel victorious having gotten them back, but what I felt instead was tired in a way that didn't come from age or effort, tired of guarding memories from people who didn't care about them. The next morning I found Hannah at the breakfast bar, scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. Not a trace of guilt in her expression, no mention of the sale or the meeting. The plates were back where they belonged, and she was pretending none of it mattered. I poured my coffee, watching her out of the corner of my eye. "Does Carl know?" I asked. She looked up, a slow, practiced blink. "Know what?" "About the china, that you sold it." She gave a soft, almost amused laugh. "Why would I tell him? He wouldn't care. He's barely home." "He should care," I said, my voice like gravel. "Because it's his mother's memory you tried to pawn off like a flea market trinket." She shrugged. "Frank, honestly, you're being sentimental over plates. No one else would get this worked up. Then you never understood what kind of home you married into." That stopped her. For a second. A flicker in the eyes. But then she smiled again, wide and false. "You want Carl to know? Fine. Tell him. but don't expect him to take your side. The challenge was clear. She knew what cards she held: Carl's exhaustion, his distance, his tendency to avoid conflict like a pothole. And she knew. I'd been hesitant to drag him into our tension, but something in me had shifted. That evening, when Carl finally came through the door with his usual distracted apology, "Long day, sorry, traffic was murder," I didn't wait. I asked him to sit with me on the porch. He looked surprised. Now? Yes, now. The air outside was thick with salt and the scent of cut grass. We sat in silence for a minute before I spoke. "I want to talk about your wife," I said, "and your mother's china." He listened, or at least sat still long enough to let me finish. I told him everything: the lie about the donation, the listing online, the pickup, how I'd bought it back myself. I watched his face for signs. There were few. He rubbed his jaw, nodded slowly. "I didn't know," he finally said. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize to me," I said. "Just don't let it happen again." He stood, hands in his pockets. "You know how she is." "That's not good enough." He didn't argue, just looked out over the hedge like it might have answers I didn't. "I'll talk to her," he said. But I already knew he wouldn't. Not really. I sat outside long after he went in, listening to the cicadas and letting the silence settle. That night, I locked the cabinet where the china lived, and then I began thinking about what else she might have touched. I started with the study. Marjorie's journals were still in the bottom drawer, wrapped in the same floral scarf she used to tie around her hair on windy days. I checked the spines, flipped through the pages. Nothing missing, nothing out of place. But I knew better than to stop there. The house had a rhythm, certain things that were never meant to move. I walked room to room the next morning, stopping at every picture frame, every box, every drawer that had once held something sacred. The guest room closet had been cleared out, not cleaned, emptied. The photo albums that used to sit stacked in the blue crate were gone. I found them 2 days later in a plastic bin in the garage next to the water heater. They smelled faintly of mildew and lawn fertilizer. The edges of the oldest one had curled from moisture. I carried them back inside, one at a time, wiping dust from the covers as if wiping insult from memory. Marjorie labeled every photo with care. Christmas '86, Carl's first piano recital, our honeymoon on Anna Maria Island. Those pages weren't just pictures. They were proof of love, of presence, of a life lived fully. That evening I didn't speak to Hannah. I didn't trust what might come out of my mouth. Instead, I called Sylvia. "I need a favor," I said. "You know any good estate lawyers still working in Collier County?" She didn't hesitate. "You planning to change something?" "I'm planning to protect something," I said, "before it's all taken out from under me." Sylvia gave me a name, and 2 days later I sat in a wood-paneled office that smelled of lemon oil and quiet judgments. The lawyer, a Mr. Henson, was younger than I expected, but his eyes were old enough. He listened while I explained, not just about the china, but the creeping theft of control, the slow erosion of what Marjorie and I had built. "I'm not dying yet," I said plainly, "but I don't plan to be buried with regrets." He nodded, took notes, asked sharp questions. We talked about the deed, the will, and the rights of those who assumed too much too quickly. "Do you want your son to inherit the house?" he asked. I looked out the window. A mockingbird was picking at something in the hedges. "I want my son to remember who the house belonged to first," I said. "If he can't protect that memory, then he shouldn't benefit from it." We made arrangements, quietly, methodically. My name stayed on the title, but I rewrote the will that week. I designated Carl as secondary. I added protections against forced sale or transfer during my lifetime. I even added Sylvia as a temporary trustee, someone who understood the value of more than just property. When I came home that evening, Hannah was in the living room, laughing into her phone with one of those friends who talked like they were always on camera. She didn't notice the envelope in my hand. She didn't see the shift in my eyes. Carl came in late again, same tired smile, same distracted kiss on her cheek. Same half-hearted glance in my direction. I didn't tell him anything, not yet. Instead, I walked into my room, sat down at the old desk, and opened Marjorie's last journal. The one she'd started the year before her diagnosis. Inside the front cover, in her looping, perfect script, she'd written a single line: "Nothing you love is ever truly safe unless you stand up for it." I rested my hand on the page, breathing slowly. That night, I slept with the windows open, let the sea air come in, because now I had a plan. The next morning, I opened the garage and dug out the old lockbox from behind a stack of rusted garden tools. It was still where I'd left it, wedged between the water heater and a crate of Christmas lights Marjorie never stopped reusing. The key was on my ring, a tiny brass thing I hadn't used in over a decade. Inside were our savings bonds, the original deed to the house, and 2 letters in Marjorie's handwriting, one marked for Carl, one marked for me. I didn't open mine, not yet. That would be the end of something, and I wasn't ready for ends. I took the deed, the bonds, and the old appraisal records, packed them neatly into a folder, and locked the box again. I would deliver these to Henson's office before the week was over. By Friday, the legal pieces were in place. I kept everything quiet, no announcements, no drama. I wasn't interested in making a scene, just clarity. Boundaries, protection. Hannah had gone quiet, too. She didn't bring up the china, the listing, or the confrontation, but I noticed she didn't enter the study anymore. She didn't move things around like she used to. Maybe she felt something shift, or maybe she'd moved on to subtler manipulations. Either way, I didn't relax. I watched. I listened. Carl was always tired. He came home with his phone at his ear and left the next morning without saying much more than, "See you, Dad." I wondered if he even noticed what was happening inside the house. On Sunday, I invited Sylvia over again. We sat on the porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea and the blue photo album between us, the one Marjorie labeled "Years by the Bay." We talked about nothing and everything. She laughed softly at the picture of me wearing a ridiculous Christmas sweater. Marjorie had knit it as a joke. I wore it 3 years in a row anyway. "I'm glad you called me," Sylvia said, setting her tea down. "Most people wouldn't have. I didn't know who else would understand. You did the right thing." I nodded. "I didn't do it out of anger." "I know." We sat a while longer, watching the sun shift across the lawn. Then she said something that surprised me. "Have you thought about moving on?" I looked at her, unsure of what she meant. "From what?" "From the house. From the war. You're fighting inside it." The words settled between us, gentle and sharp all at once. I hadn't thought of it as a war, just defense, just preservation. "This is all I have," I said. "No," she said gently. "It's just all you've protected." She left shortly after, leaving me alone with her question. And that night, while the house hummed and the air thickened with Florida heat, I opened the letter Marjorie had left for me. The paper was soft, creased where I'd folded it 1,000 times and never dared unfold. Her handwriting was steady, looped the way it always was when she wrote late at night. "Frank," it began, "if you're reading this, you're still here and I'm not. That hurts my heart to think about. But I know you, and I know you'll try to carry me with you in every plate, every curtain, every photo frame, and that's beautiful. But it's not fair. I want you to keep me, but not at the cost of your peace. Our love was a home, not just a house. If the house starts to feel like a prison, I need you to leave it. Find something new, not for me, for you." I read it twice, then I folded it gently, like I was laying her down to sleep. That night, I didn't dream. But I woke up with one clear thought. I had done what I needed to. Now it was time to decide what I wanted. I started by reclaiming the kitchen. It sounds small, but that room had once been mine, or rather, ours. Marjorie always said the kitchen was the heart of the home, and she kept it alive with soups and pies and warm light on rainy days. Since Hannah moved in, it had become something else entirely. Sterilized, aesthetic, impersonal. There were white marble trays holding utensils no one used and little vases filled with dried grass that looked more like kindling than decoration. That morning I pulled everything off the counters and put back what mattered. The hand-painted canisters Marjorie bought from that flea market in Ocala, her chipped blue mixing bowl. I even brought back the faded kitchen towel with the pineapple print that had hung beside the stove for 20 years. Hannah had called it tacky. I called it history. She came down half an hour later, barefoot, clutching a cup of green tea like it was a fashion statement. "Did you redecorate?" she asked, her tone somewhere between amusement and accusation. "I restored," I said. Her lips twitched, but she said nothing. Maybe she was starting to realize that not everything in this house would bend to her taste. Later that week, I opened the cedar chest in the hallway, the one Marjorie had once filled with quilts, letters, even the christening gown Carl wore when he was 3 months old. It still smelled like her perfume, that lavender one she used only for church or weddings. I took out a stack of old Polaroids and sorted them in the den, laying each photo on the table like a map back to myself. That's when Carl walked in. He looked older than his years, slouched from too many long shifts and missed meals. He stood in the doorway for a second, watching me. "You're going through the past?" he asked. "I'm making peace with it." He sat down across from me, glanced at a photo of himself on a tricycle. "You were always better at holding on to things." I waited. He cleared his throat. "Hannah said you changed the will." I nodded. I did. His face twitched, a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. "You didn't think I should know? You would have heard it from me eventually. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "She's upset. I'm sure she is. She feels like you're trying to cut us out." "No," I said calmly. "I'm making sure no one else tries to cut me out." He looked down. "She crossed a line with the china. I won't defend that." I leaned forward. "It wasn't just the china. It's the way she walked through this house like she owned it, like everything sacred was subject to her approval." I should have stopped it. I didn't answer, because he already knew he should have, and because I knew it wasn't easy, being pulled between your father and your wife. But some lines are meant to be drawn. "What happens now?" he asked. "I've protected what I needed to," I said. "The rest depends on you two." He nodded, slowly. "I want to fix things. Start by seeing them clearly." That night I walked through the house one last time before bed. I touched the edge of the table, the bookshelf, the windowsill where Marjorie kept her violets. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The house was no longer just a place being defended. It was becoming mine again. But she wasn't finished with it. The confrontation came 3 days later, sharp and sudden, like Florida thunder. I was on the porch pruning the potted rosemary Marjorie used to swear warded off mosquitoes when I heard the front door swing open behind me. "I want to talk," Hannah said. "No pleasantries." I stood slowly. "Then talk." She crossed her arms, standing just inside the doorway like she didn't want to fully commit to the conversation. "Carl told me what you did, about the will, the trust, locking things down. I did what needed doing." "You don't trust me," she said flatly. I met her eyes. "You gave me reason not to." Her chin lifted. "It was just china, Frank, a box of dishes you hadn't touched in years." "It wasn't just dishes," I said. "It was my wife's memory, and you tried to sell it without asking." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. A flicker of uncertainty passed over her face, but pride's a stubborn thing. "You could have talked to me," she said, softer now. "Instead, you humiliated me." "No," I replied. "You did that to yourself. I simply bought back what was already mine." She stepped forward, eyes flashing. "You think this house makes you powerful? You think it gives you the right to control everything?" "This house doesn't make me powerful," I said. "But it holds the life I built, the woman I loved. And if you can't respect that, then you don't belong here." Her mouth tightened, a thin line of frustration. "So what? You're kicking us out now." "I haven't made that decision," I said calmly. "But if you force my hand, I will." She stared at me, waiting for me to blink. I didn't. After a long silence, she turned and walked back inside, her footsteps sharp against the wood floor. Later that night, Carl came to me again. This time, his shoulders weren't slumped. He looked like a man who had finally decided to stand up. "She told me everything," he said. "What you said, what she said. I'm not here to defend her." I just nodded. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once spilled orange juice as a boy, where Marjorie had baked cookies every December without fail. "I've been blind," he said, "or maybe I just let things slide too long because it was easier." "That's how you lose things," I said, one small silence at a time. He took a deep breath. "She's going to stay with her sister for a while. Think things over. I told her she needs to respect the house. And you, if we're going to stay here." I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I needed to feel what they meant. "I'm not proud of how this played out," he added, "but I'm not proud of how I've been either." I looked at him, not as my son, but as a man trying, finally, to face himself. "I want to earn back your trust," he said. "You start by keeping your word," I replied. He nodded. That night I walked past the cabinet, still locked. I didn't open it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and turned on the small radio Marjorie used to hum along with. The station was playing Ella Fitzgerald, the same album we danced to on our 20th anniversary. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months I felt something close to peace. Not resolution, not yet, but peace enough to sleep. When I woke the next morning, the quiet in the house felt different. Not empty, just honest. No perfume in the air, no clicking heels across the tile. Hannah's presence had always filled the house like artificial scent, noticeable, clinging, but not welcome. Now it felt like the space could breathe again. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong, 2 spoons of sugar, nothing trendy about it. I drank it slowly by the bay window, watching the pelicans skim the water. It was the first morning in months I didn't feel like a stranger in my own skin. Carl had already left for work. He left a note on the counter. "Thanks for the talk. Let's keep going." I folded it and put it in the drawer beside Marjorie's apron. I didn't need the words, but they meant something. I spent the day unhurried, the kind of slow that isn't laziness, just deliberate. I fixed the loose latch on the garden gate, re-oiled the hinges on the porch screen, trimmed the hibiscus that had overgrown along the side path. There were things I used to do when Marjorie was alive, small rituals of care that had fallen away under the weight of grief and distraction. Now each act felt like a form of return. In the afternoon, I opened the piano bench and pulled out the old sheet music. Carl had stopped playing at 17, but Marjorie never let me sell the upright. She said a piano was a promise, even if it went silent. I dusted the keys, played a few soft, clumsy chords. My hands remembered more than I thought they would. Sylvia called just after 3. "How's the air in your kingdom today?" "Still mine," I said, "and fresher." She laughed. "Good. I was thinking of stopping by tomorrow. I found something you might want to see." "What is it?" "A listing," she said. "Not what you're thinking. This one's for you." I frowned. "I'm not in the market." "You might be," she said. "You just don't know it yet." The next morning she showed up with her usual canvas bag and a brochure printed in soft pastels. It was a community complex on the north side of Naples, modest homes, no gates, but well kept, close to the library, walking distance to the bay, a neighborhood for people like me, not retirees exactly, but not forgotten either. "I'm not selling the house," I said. "I know," she said, "but you said you wanted to decide what you wanted. Thought this might help you see the options." I stared at the pictures, porches with rocking chairs, windows with flower boxes, little community gardens tucked between the streets. "I'm not ready," I said. "You don't have to be. Just know you could be." We sat on the porch, brochure between us, neither of us pushing. It felt good, not to be cornered, not to defend anything, just to consider. That night, I didn't dream about Marjorie. But I did think about the kind of morning where you wake up and every corner of the house is yours again. Not because you protected it from someone, but because you chose to carry the good forward. After dinner, I unlocked the china cabinet. I took out one of the dessert plates, delicate and still gleaming in the low kitchen light. Then I plated myself a slice of leftover lemon cake. Marjorie always said dessert didn't need an occasion. That night, I remembered what she meant, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled without realizing it. The next morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, sun spilling across my face, eyes soft around the edges. I looked like a man who had just come in from a walk, not someone haunted by the memory of a fight. My shoulders weren't tight, my jaw had loosened. It surprised me how quietly peace arrives when you stop holding the door shut. I drove down to the bait shop after breakfast, not because I needed anything, but because the ritual of choosing line and tackle still made me feel like myself. Ed, the owner, greeted me like no time had passed. "Still chasing shadows off the coast?" he asked, grinning. "Just chasing a quiet mind," I said. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. We all age differently, but we want the same thing in the end, time that feels like our own. Afterward, I stopped by the pier. I watched the kids throw cast nets and shout over seagulls. I sat on the bench Marjorie and I used to claim on slow Sundays, right near the end where the waves hit hardest. It still held her initials, carved with a pocket knife one summer when we were too much in love to care if it lasted. When I got back home, I opened the windows, every one. Let the salt air drift through the house like a benediction. I turned on the radio and let it play whatever it wanted, jazz, folk, a little Sinatra. I danced, just a little, slow and clumsy, in the kitchen with the dish rag in my hand. No music in the world could have matched the feeling of simply being free inside my own life again. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a home. That night, I made dinner for one. I roasted chicken the way Marjorie used to, with rosemary from the garden and slices of lemon tucked under the skin. I used her casserole dish, the one with the cracked handle she refused to throw out. I ate at the table, no distractions, just me, the meal, and the quiet kind of joy that doesn't announce itself but lingers long after the last bite. When I was done, I washed everything by hand, dried it with the old towel, put it all back where it belonged. Then I sat in the den and looked through another photo album. This one was filled with images of the later years, Carl at college, Christmases where it was just the two of us, road trips with flannel shirts and gas station coffee. I saw myself aging, but not fading. I saw Marjorie's smile deepen. I saw life not just lived, but noticed. Somewhere around page 30, I found a picture I didn't remember taking, just me, sitting on the porch, cup in hand, Marjorie's shadow behind me on the screen. It must have been late afternoon. The angle of the light made it look like she was standing right over my shoulder. I stared at it a long time. I didn't cry. Not then. But I felt her with me. Not as a ghost. Not even as memory. Just as something steady. Like breath. And I thought, maybe this is what healing really is. Not forgetting. Not forgiving before you're ready. Just remembering with less pain. Less noise. That night, I didn't lock the cabinet. I didn't need to anymore. 2 days later, I heard the knock. Not the kind that says delivery or neighbor or polite interruption. This one was slower, hesitant, like the knuckles behind it weren't sure they belonged there. When I opened the door, it was Maddie, Carl and Hannah's daughter, my granddaughter. 14, all limbs and earbuds and quiet defiance. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, which wasn't saying much. It had been over a year. She stood there in her denim jacket, eyes scanning the porch like she was looking for something to hold on to. "I'm not supposed to be here," she said, "but I came anyway." I opened the screen door wider. "Then come in." She stepped past me with the caution of someone entering a museum, not a house she'd once played in. I remembered her running through this hallway in socks, chasing a balloon, her giggles bouncing off the walls like wind chimes. Now she moved slowly, as if afraid to touch anything. "I just wanted to see for myself," she said, not sitting, just shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Mom said you were being weird, that you were locking stuff up and acting paranoid." I nodded. "And what do you think?" She looked at the cabinet, now unlocked, Then at the kitchen, where the old bowl sat on the counter like it always had when Marjorie made pie crust. "I think it looks like you." I smiled. It always did. We sat in the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to bolt. I didn't push. I let her speak when she was ready. "Why did you lock it all away?" she finally asked. "The china, the pictures." "Because someone tried to take what wasn't theirs," I said, and I didn't stop them soon enough. She picked at the seam on her jacket. "I heard Mom yelling about it. Said you embarrassed her." "She embarrassed herself." Maddie blinked. I figured. She looked older in that moment. Not just taller, wiser. Like someone who'd started questioning the adults in her life and was quietly forming her own truths. "She doesn't talk about Grandma much," she said, "but I remember her. I remember how she used to put stickers on my sandwich bag. She said it made lunch feel less lonely." I felt something shift in my chest. "I've missed this house," Maddie whispered. "It always smelled like cinnamon, like stories." I stood, walked to the cabinet, and opened it gently. I took out a teacup, Marjorie's favorite, and held it out. "Want some?" I asked. She nodded. "Only if it's sweet." I made us tea. Just like Marjorie used to, extra honey for Maddie, a lemon slice on the rim. We sat together, sipping slowly, the silence soft instead of strained. "I want to come by more," she said after a while, "if that's okay." "It's more than okay." She finished her tea, set the cup down gently, like it mattered. Then she pulled something from her pocket, a little pressed flower framed between wax paper. "I brought this," she said. "It's not much, just something I wanted to give you." I took it carefully. It was a violet, tiny, perfect, the color of dusk. I thought of Marjorie's garden, of the windowsill where she used to hum. "It's everything," I said. When she left, I stood at the door and watched her walk down the driveway, head high, a girl becoming her own woman, a quiet rebellion against the noise she'd been raised in. That night, I placed the violet in the same journal where Marjorie had written her last letter, and for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Hope. It lasted about 3 days. On the 4th morning, Hannah returned. She didn't knock, just walked in like she always used to, purse slung over one shoulder, phone in hand, eyes scanning the room with a look I recognized too well. Appraisal disguised as indifference. I was at the kitchen table sipping coffee from Marjorie's cup, the one with the rose pattern worn faint on the rim. Hannah stopped in the doorway, cocked her head slightly. "Well," she said, "looks like nothing's changed." "Plenty has," I replied without looking up. She didn't sit. Just stood there, tension hanging around her like static. "I talked to Carl," she said. "He told me you had Maddie over. She came of her own accord. She's 14. She's not blind," I said, "and she remembers more than you think." Hannah crossed her arms. "You've always had a way of making yourself the victim." I set the cup down slowly. "I'm not a victim. I'm someone who let too much slide for too long." She laughed once, short and sharp. "You think you're the only one grieving? The only one with memories?" "I think you sold mine," I said, standing now, and then called it clutter. We stood in silence, eye to eye. "I came back because Carl wants to make this work," she said, her voice tight. "He asked me to try. But if you're going to keep turning Maddie against me—" "I didn't say a word against you," I cut in. She saw who you were on her own. Her jaw clenched. "You're poisoning this family." "No," I said, calm and final. "I'm cleaning up the rot." She took a step forward. "You think locking a cabinet and calling a lawyer makes you a hero?" "No," I said, "but it makes me not a fool." She stared at me, something unreadable in her face. Then without another word, she turned and left the room. I listened to her footsteps retreat down the hall, the sound of her pulling open drawers, moving things, as if to reclaim ground. But this wasn't her ground anymore. That afternoon, Carl came home early. He looked tired again, but different this time, worn not by work, but by worry. "She told me everything," he said as we stood by the porch. "Said you're pushing her out." "She's pushing herself." He rubbed his temples. "She wants to make this work." "At what cost, Carl?" He didn't answer. I let the silence grow. "I saw Maddie the other day," he said finally. She smiled, like really smiled. "It's been a while." "She belongs here," I said. "You all did once." Carl looked at me then, really looked, like he was trying to see past years of noise. "I don't want to lose this," he said, "then fight for it the right way." He nodded once, but I saw the crack in him, the pressure building, the choice, waiting. I didn't envy him, but I wasn't going to save him from it either. That night I sat by the open window, the journal in my lap. The violet Maddie gave me had started to dry and press itself gently into the page. It looked delicate but unbroken, like something that could survive. I closed the book and set it beside me. The house was still. No yelling, no footsteps, just wind through the screens. And in that hush, I knew something for certain. If Hannah tried to take anything else, my peace, my place, my granddaughter's smile, she'd be met with more than silence. She'd be met with steel. The chance came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, while Carl was at work and Maddie at school, Hannah cornered me in the hallway. She held a folder in one hand, her nails tapping against it like a metronome. Her smile was brittle, like a painted mask. "I've had some thoughts," she began, walking into the den without invitation, "about the future, about the house." I followed, slower. "Go on." She laid the folder on the coffee table and opened it to a printed packet. Real estate comps, potential listings, an agent's card tucked inside. "Naples is hot right now," she said. "You'd get more than you think. Enough for a condo closer to the water, less upkeep, fewer stairs." "I'm managing just fine with the stairs." She ignored that. "Carl and I could help facilitate the sale. Keep it clean. Professional." My chest tightened, not with surprise, with recognition. This was her final move. The push disguised as kindness, the suggestion masked as concern. "And where would you and Carl go?" I asked, though I already knew. "We'd stay on. Raise Maddie here. It's a great space for a teenager." I looked down at the papers. The numbers were bold, the promises bigger. But they couldn't measure worth. They didn't know that behind the den wall was where Marjorie and I painted clouds on the nursery ceiling. That the third step creaked because Carl used to leap over it pretending to be Superman. That this house didn't just shelter. It held. I closed the folder gently. "No." She blinked. "No? I'm not selling." She stepped closer. "You'd have your own place. Peace. Freedom." "I already have those." Her tone sharpened. "This isn't just about you, Frank." "Yes," I said. "It is." She drew back like I'd slapped her. "You're being selfish." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being clear, and I'm done giving pieces of my life to people who treat it like a temporary rental." She crossed her arms. "You think Maddie will keep visiting once this gets ugly? Maddie has her own eyes now. She'll see who tried to turn her home into leverage." The words hung there between us. No shouting, no scenes, just truth. She gathered the folder, her movements tight and clipped. "Carl will have something to say about this." "Then he'd better say it to my face," I replied. "Not through you." She left without another word. Later that evening I called Sylvia. I told her everything. The folder, the offer, the threat veiled in civility. "She's desperate," Sylvia said. "People get loud when they realize they've lost control." "Good," I said. "Let her get loud." I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning I called Mr. Henson. We finalized every remaining clause of the trust. I added language that secured Maddie's future stake if she ever needed it. Educational use, first home funds, whatever helped her stay grounded. "She's the only one who's earned it," I told him. Carl came home late that night. He looked drained. "She told me," he said, "about the offer, about what you said." "And what did you say?" "I told her we're not forcing anyone out of anywhere," he replied, "especially not the man who built it." I nodded. "I'm not trying to punish her, but I won't reward her either." "She's going back to her sister's again," he added quietly. "Maybe for longer this time." He paused. "Maddie wants to stay the weekend here." My voice didn't break, but it came close. "She's always welcome." That night I turned off all the lights, then stood at the window. The street was quiet. The war was over. But life didn't just return to normal. It reshaped itself. That weekend, Maddie arrived with a duffel bag and a paperback novel half read. She kicked off her sneakers by the door like she used to, then paused and looked up at me with a grin that tugged at the edge of something I hadn't felt in years. "Got any cinnamon sticks left?" she asked. I laughed. "Always." We made cider together that night. Real cider, not the powdered kind, with cloves, apple slices, orange peel, and yes, cinnamon. She stirred it like a chemist, careful and quiet, the steam curling around her face as if the kitchen recognized her. It did. So did I. Later, we sat on the porch with our mugs. The air had a softness to it, the kind that comes just before Florida shifts from heat into something resembling fall. "You ever think about dating again?" Maddie asked out of nowhere. I nearly choked on a sip. That's a sharp turn from homework and apples. She shrugged. "Just wondering. Grandma wouldn't want you to be alone forever." I looked out at the bay. No, she wouldn't, but she'd also tell me not to rush it, that love, real love, doesn't come knocking. It wanders in, usually while you're planting tomatoes or fixing a porch step. She smiled. "So, you're saying there's hope for Sylvia?" I turned and gave her a look. "You've been listening at doors again." "She makes you laugh," Maddie said. That's rare. I didn't answer right away, because it was true. Sylvia did make me laugh, not the loud kind, but the quiet exhale that feels like oxygen after holding your breath too long. She never pushed. She just showed up, like understanding in human form. The next afternoon, Sylvia dropped by with a lemon tart and a stack of books she thought Maddie might like. Historical fiction, she said. The good kind, witty women, difficult choices. Maddie accepted them like sacred texts. While she disappeared into the den, Sylvia and I stood in the kitchen, sipping tea. "She's blooming," Sylvia said. "It's like she's exhaled. She's not the only one." We didn't talk about Hannah, or Carl, or court papers, locked cabinets, or wills. We talked about tomatoes, actually. How the ones at the store tasted like cardboard, how nothing beat a homegrown vine. I told her I was thinking of building a small raised bed near the side fence. "Start small," she said, "but start." It wasn't just gardening advice. Before she left, she touched my wrist, just lightly. No promises, no drama, just presence. After she was gone, Maddie wandered into the kitchen with one of the books tucked under her arm. "She's cool," she said casually. "You could do worse." "I already have," I said, and we both laughed. That night, while Maddie was brushing her teeth, I found myself rearranging a drawer. Not to tidy it, just to make room. It felt symbolic, or maybe just overdue. I placed the pressed violet gently into a small frame and set it on the nightstand. The next morning, Maddie asked if she could plant something near the porch. "Something blue," she said, "so Grandma knows where to find us." We went to the nursery after breakfast. We picked out violets. We planted them that same afternoon. The soil was soft for morning rain, the kind of damp that holds memory. Maddie dug carefully, pressing each root down like she was tucking in a child. I stood beside her, handing tools, brushing away the dirt from her elbows. The garden bed wasn't big, just a narrow patch near the porch, but it felt like sacred ground. "Think they'll take?" she asked, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "They will," I said. "Everything we've fought for deserves to root." By evening, the last bloom was in. We stood back, hands dirty, shoes muddy, hearts lighter. That night, Carl showed up with 2 pizza boxes and an expression that held both caution and quiet gratitude. "Maddie texted," he said. "Told me about the violets. I thought I'd stop by." We ate on the porch, the 3 of us, passing napkins and memories. Carl watched Maddie laugh and reach for a second slice, and I saw something settle in his shoulders, like a man slowly forgiving himself. After Maddie went to bed, Carl lingered. "She told me she wants to stay with you more often," he said. "She's always welcome," he nodded. "Hannah won't like it." "She doesn't have to." He looked out into the dark yard. "I filed the separation papers last week. I didn't speak, I just listened. I kept thinking it would get better, he said, but it was never really good to begin with. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I'm not, he replied, not anymore. The next morning I woke early and walked the house, every window open, every corner quiet. I made coffee and stood by the garden, the violets catching first light like they knew they were finally seen. Sylvia came by just before noon. She brought a birdhouse, hand-painted, sky blue, with a tiny wooden perch. I thought your porch could use company, she said. We hung it together, laughing as we tried to straighten the angle. Mattie helped, holding the nails and suggesting names for the birds that might move in. Later, Sylvia and I sat under the eaves while Mattie read on the steps. The air smelled of loam and fresh wood, the kind of scent that makes you believe in second chances. I got approved for the community garden plot, I told Sylvia, starting with tomatoes, maybe herbs. She smiled. Told you, start small. That evening I brought down the last of the old boxes from the attic, not out of duty, but desire. I sorted them with care, choosing what to keep, what to give, and what to let go. Among the faded papers, I found the blueprint Marjorie drew for her dream reading nook, the one she never got to build. I looked at it for a long time. Then I made a call. The contractor came the next day. It's just a corner of the den, I explained. Built-ins, maybe a bench, nothing grand, just something she would have liked. He nodded. We can make it happen. For the next week, sawdust filled the air, hammers tapped out steady rhythms. I moved books into piles, picked cushions that felt soft but solid. By the time the bench was finished, wide enough for two, with storage below, the house felt like it had exhaled. The nook wasn't big, but it was hers. It was ours. It was mine. When Mattie curled up there with her new novel, sunlight spilling across her lap, I didn't need to say anything. The silence was the answer. Not just a house. A home, complete. I used to think closure would arrive like a door slamming shut, sharp, final, unmistakable. But it didn't. It came like soft morning light slipping through curtains, like a drawer that opens without creaking, like my own breath, steady now, unafraid of silence. Weeks passed, the violets bloomed stronger. Mattie's visits became regular, not as escape, but as return. Carl came often too, sometimes just to mow the lawn or fix a gutter, sometimes just to sit beside me and talk about things that didn't hurt. Hannah didn't return. Not even once. Her silence felt less like absence and more like relief. Sylvia and I grew into something easy. No declarations, no urgency, just two people finding laughter in the same moments, choosing each other again each time we sat together. Sometimes I'd find her note folded on the windowsill. Lemon tart cooling. Come steal a slice. One afternoon I sat with Mattie on the new bench. She was reading, curled up beside me, her head leaning slightly against my shoulder. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked without looking up. "I think I finally am." She smiled but didn't say more. That was enough. Later that evening I sat alone in the den with Marjorie's journal in my lap, the one she kept quietly, tucked behind the spice rack. I hadn't opened it since the day I found the violet. The last page held no grand revelation, no dramatic farewell, just a line in her steady hand. If you ever feel lost, plant something, watch it grow. I ran my finger across the ink, slow and reverent. Outside, the birdhouse had visitors, a finch couple, chirping softly from the perch. I watched them from the kitchen window, coffee warm in my hands. The house was clean. Not spotless, but lived in. Mine again. One morning I walked to the community garden my tomato vines had taken. Little green fruit clung to the branches, shy and stubborn. I knelt and tied them gently to the stakes, whispering encouragement like Marjorie used to, when she coaxed life from seeds. I saw a woman down the path tending to basil. She looked up and smiled. Not Sylvia. Someone new. She waved, I waved back. It didn't need to be anything more. It was just nice to be noticed. On my way home, I stopped at the beach. The water was calm, the tide low. I sat on the bench near the pier, the one we carved our initials into long ago. I traced the letters with my thumb and let the breeze comb through what hair I had left, and I thought, I didn't lose everything. Some things I had to give up, others I had to protect. A few I had to rebuild, but the best of it stayed. That night I set a place at the table for one, used the good plate, poured a glass of wine. No reason, just because. After dinner I walked out to the porch and sat beneath the birdhouse, the garden behind me, the sky slipping toward a velvet dusk. I watched the lights come on inside the house, warm, golden, familiar. No longer a fortress, not a museum, not a tomb, just a home that held everything I needed. My past, honored, my present, lived, and my future, waiting, but not rushed. I closed my eyes and smiled. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had come back to myself, and I was free.